By the way, hello to everybody who's watching us on churchoflight.tv.
Well,
You know, part of this is we have to get comfortable with what we're doing. So the whole first part of this thing is getting comfortable with this process and learning, you know, how to interact like this. Well, for one thing, when you have questions, you can't just blurt them out because 2 or 3 people might do it at the same time. So what I'd like everybody to do is to, in the chat window, which is down at the bottom of your control has a little red arrow up at the top of it that will maximize it or minimize it, so you don't have to look at it. But down at the bottom of the control, it also has a chat window, and you can type something in there, and I'm going to type in hello. All right, here we go. We're going to do the Astrology Lab and the Tarot Lab. We wanted to offer them both, but we thought we'd just alternate them. So the Astrology Lab is really going to concentrate on chart delineation, and I'm going to talk more about that in a minute. But then you can see next week will be the Astrology Lab, and then there'll be a Tarot Lab, and then there'll be 2 Astrology Labs. So he's going to come in and do tarot readings and show you how to do tarot readings in an interactive way, which I think is going to be really interesting. Today, we're going to go over preliminary stuff with regard to chart delineation and over what you need to know in order to do the rest of the class. And then we'll go over 7 steps in judging. So we'll go down, we'll sort of do an overview of the preliminary stuff that you do when you do a chart reading. Then next week we're going to get more into exactly what everything that a chart reading should include. We're going to talk about the decadence, which is a very important part of doing a complete chart reading. Handouts, you'll be able to, I'll probably email everybody the handouts, but you can always go get them online at churchoflight.tv. So if you log in there, you can go download the handouts. Now, what won't be there are these charts, okay? But I'm going to give you these charts too. Okay, the bibliography, this is not really bibliography. This is what we're using for the course. There's Chapter 2, the Zodiac, and Chapter 3, Mundane Houses, and Course 2, Astrological Signatures. We're going to talk about that. The planets are also in Chapter 3, Mundane Houses. Then in Course 8, Horary Astrology, there's 2 chapters, Strength and Aspects, and 7 Steps in Judging. And then finally, 10.1, Delineating the Horoscope, is the main course textbook. Okay, this course was originally designed as to be intermediate and above, because you're assumed to know certain things. It's hard to learn astrology unless you learn certain things. You have to actually memorize certain things. You have to be able to know, of course, all the glyphs, the planets, the signs in their order. You have to be able to know their glyphs instantly and be able to write them down. You have to know the signs and their opposites. You have to know that Virgo, the opposite of Virgo is Pisces. If you don't know that, you have to go memorize that. Then there's the Triplicities and the Quadruplicities. Here's the signs and their opposites. The Triplicities, movable, mutable, and fixed. And we'll talk just a little bit about those. And Quadruplicities. You have to have these memorized. You have to know these absolutely cold in your sleep, okay? Without doing that, it's impossible to read a chart. Now, the other thing is keywords and the importance of keywords. So let me, like, for example, here are the keywords for the signs. The keywords are critical, and these are other things that you need to memorize, okay? And the reason is because they give you a core on which to build a vocabulary. And in astrology, vocabulary is critical. you've got to have all the right words, or you can't put together a chart delineation, even for yourself. Okay, and the reason that we're kind of adamant about this is that there are lots of good books out there on astrology, and there's lots of bad books. Okay, and what Zane has done is he's got the best, he's got the most consistent. It's a thoroughly consistent system, okay, and it's pretty pure, okay, so that the idea is that you learn these key words, but then what you want to do is you want to go out and once you've read the Zane stuff and you have a good firm foundation, there's lots of books that you want to read to build up your vocabulary. The key is that you have a good foundation, so you don't start adding a lot of stuff to your vocabulary that's not right. And what I'm going to do is sort of review what's in Course 2, Astrological Signatures. Not the first chapter, but the second chapter. The second chapter goes over the 4 zodiacal triplicities, and it has some very interesting stuff in it. And also the 3 qualities, which are that's a kind of an interesting name. The triplicities are, of course, the fire, air, earth, and water. The quadruplicities are the cardinal or movable, fixed, and mutable signs. And you need to have key words for all those things too, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But when you go down through this book in Course 2, he talks about degrees of emanation, which I'm not going to talk about right now, but you can go read that. And then he goes into each sign. And when he's talking about a sign, he does a great job of boiling it down to just the absolute most fundamental things about that sign. There's no, there's no fluff in there. And what that means, that he does the same thing with the planets, and this is in the Course 2, Astrological Signatures, in the mundane houses, and this gives you a tremendous background. And so when you go out and read these other books, and there's a lot of good books, and you do need to do that to get good, you can always come back to this core stuff. Many of them do not have the discipline that it takes to be a really good astrologer. And they're writing books, and they want to talk as much as they can. Well, they just ramble on, and they make it up as they go. Okay, now you read this stuff, and then you go get some more books and you read, and you'll see what I'm talking about. Sometimes you just get the feeling that they're making it up as they go to fill up the book. So what you've got to do is you've got to be very discriminating in building up your vocabulary. And that's why we use key words. I'm going right down the agenda. Amazing. And let me tell another pitfall. Okay, is there's some very good books that will tell you what Mars in Capricorn means, or what Mars square Jupiter means. Any aspect in a chart, let's say it's Mars square Jupiter, that aspect can express as an infinite number of things. Okay. People who have Mars square Jupiter, are constantly fighting about religion. Okay.
Well, they spend way too much money.
Or they spend way too much money. Okay. Well, those may be perfectly legitimate expressions of that aspect, but there's an infinite number of them. Okay. How do you interpret a chart if an aspect in a chart can express in an infinite number of ways? Well, we can thank God for that. But what you do is you know that its expression will always be characteristic of the 2 planets, the signs they're in, and the aspect that they make. Okay? So you have to start out, when you do somebody's chart, you can't get too specific, because that aspect will express in one person's chart one way and another person's chart another way. Now, no doubt there are common ways that they do express. And the more reading you do, the more you'll get a feeling for that. But the key thing is that to do a really good interpretation, for example, on your own chart, you have to go through your chart and identify, you take the key aspects in the chart, and you identify what those are in your life, how those actually express. The nature of Mars as in an obstacle aspect with your religious urges, and knowing everything. So you can go down and you can write everything you know about Mars, everything you know about Jupiter, and kind of try and put together, well, what in my life, how is this thing expressing in my life? If you're doing it for a client, early on in a client relationship, your analysis can't be too specific, because if it is, you know, you're going to miss something. And you can make a more general analysis of some aspect of the chart, and if you by educating your client as to how to use that information, it can be very useful to them. I'm just going to mention a few things that are kind of my pet peeve. If you want to become a good astrologer, the importance of critical thinking. And critical thinking means that when you read something, you just don't believe it. You kind of take it in and you analyze it a little bit, and you ask questions like, well, if that were true, what are the implications of that? And part of critical thinking is avoiding drawing conclusions without lots of supporting evidence. For example, what people typically do is they know a Leo, and this Leo does something all the time, and so the assumption is that that's what Leos do. Okay, well, that's not going to work because your sample set is too small. You got one Leo, right? I mean, it could be any aspect in the chart. Now, it could be, you know, as you get good at this, you can recognize Leo traits, and you can say, wow, that is definitely a Leo trait. I've seen it before. And or you may read something in one of the books, in one of our books or in other books. You just got to be careful about drawing conclusions. And the other thing, your worst enemy is a thing called confirmation bias. Okay, confirmation bias is the tendency of people to favor information that confirms their beliefs. And everybody is guilty of this. But what it does is, if you have a theory about how something works, let's say you think that there are more accidents during a full moon. Okay, people go a little crazy. What confirmation bias does is every time somebody has an accident, you look up and there's a full moon, you know, you see, there it is. That's the reason there's a full moon. The problem is with confirmation bias, you never remember or record all those instances where there are accidents and there are no full moon. Okay, now I don't want to get too scientific here, but and I'm not going to say any more about this during the class, but I always think it's important to just introduce everybody to those concepts. Okay, in course 2, in chapter 2, the Zodiac, it covers the 4 zodiacal triplicities, and he says 3 qualities, but what he means by those are the Quadruplicities, which are the movable, mutable, and fixed. And we say movable for cardinal. Another word for it is cardinal signs. So, well, I'll just run through these real quick. Fire, earth, air, water. These are not particularly important. But when we get down here, now these are the Quadruplicities. These are the movable signs or cardinal signs. Aries, Cancer, Capricorn, Libra. You have to know the Quadruplicities code. Here's the fixed signs. The fixed signs are Taurus, Leo, Scorpio, and Aquarius. And then finally the mutable signs. And they call them Quadruplicity because there's 4 signs in each group. Here's the mutable signs. Gemini, Sag, Pisces, and Virgo. The reason you have to know these is because when you look at a chart, you have to be able to see the aspects of the chart. Okay. Now, you can always depend on the computer to print all the aspects out. But if you can see the aspects in a chart, you can do a much better job of delineating the chart. So you have to know the quadruplicities code. And the reason is because when there is a planet in Sagittarius and a planet in Gemini, now they're opposite signs. If they're close to the same degree, then they're in opposition. They're in opposition aspect. If you've got a planet in Gemini and a planet in Virgo, you know automatically, because those are two mutable signs, they're 90 degrees, that those two planets, if they're close, within 5, 6, 7, 8 degrees, that they're going to be square each other. Same thing with the fixed signs. If you've got a planet in Aquarius and a planet in Taurus near the same degree of that sign, then they are going to be square each other. If it's Taurus and Scorpio, it's an opposition. Okay, then the triplicities here are the triplicities: fire, air, earth, and water. The three water signs are Cancer, Scorpio, and Pisces. And the reason is because any planet that is, if you have a planet in Scorpio and a planet in Cancer, they're going to be trying each other if they're anywhere near the same degree. And you just can see that instantly. And so you're not always fooling around looking at the aspect table, trying to figure out what the aspect is. You just see these aspects in the chart. And anyway, you have to know these anyway. So what you do is you memorize them. And you say them over and over until you got them nailed down. Then the other thing is that, the other thing you remember in seeing aspects in a chart is that air signs are compatible with fire signs. And earth signs are compatible with water signs. And so if you have a planet in, I don't know how, you can't use the thing. If you have a planet in Aries and a planet in Gemini, then they're going to be 60 degrees. They're 60 degrees apart. So that aspect would be the sextile aspect. And so you can see that. If it's Taurus and Cancer, it's sextile. Those two signs are close to each other and they're compatible signs. They must be the two planets. If they're near the same degree, it must be a sextile. There it is. Aspect, glyphs, and keywords. Here are the 10 aspects that we use, because these are things that you have to go home and memorize. Otherwise, it's very difficult. You'll never learn astrology if you just don't memorize it. So these are the keywords. These 10 aspects. Conjunction, when two planets are very close together in the chart, that forms a prominence compound. And what that means is that it stands out, that it's something that is very prominent in the life of that person. If they're 30 degrees, and once you know the order of the signs, you know that Aries and Taurus are right next to each other, right? So that means they're 30 degrees apart, and if the two planets are very close to the same degree, then there'll be a semisextile. That's a mildly harmonious aspect that we call the growth aspect. It's mildly harmonious, and depending upon the nature of the two planets, it can grow into something that can be of benefit. The two difficult ones are the semi-square, which is 45 degrees, and the sesqui-square, which is 135 degrees. Those, most people never figure out how to be able to actually see those in a chart, and they just go to the aspect grid. To summarize what I'm saying is that it goes back to the certain basic things that you must go and memorize. And the people that study astrology and never get anywhere, the reason they don't get anywhere basically is because, first of all, they haven't done the basics. They haven't gone and memorized the stuff and the key words where they can come up with the key words right away. Okay. And, by the way, let me say this. I know I sound adamant about a lot of this stuff.
Guess what sign is Mercury's in?
Vicky's laughing over here. I mean, I have Mercury
in
Leo close conjunct Saturn. So, it sounds like it's, if you don't do this, they're going to come take you away. But And so now I want to temper that because we're all just human here. So as we go through the rest of this course, I'm encouraging you to go, know that stuff cold. But we're also going to try and have fun. I'm going to try and get through the part that's not so fun tonight. Do your homework, but we're going to try and have a good time. This is not to make people feel bad because they don't know that Aries is the I am sign or something like that. Okay, that's not the purpose. But we are going to be going into charts and delineating the charts, assuming that there's some basic knowledge there. Okay.
Well, and another thing about becoming good at applying this information is having a community of people that you can talk with.
Mm-hmm.
And
yeah, that's all exactly. And I'm hoping that when we, which will probably be starting next week, I want to go through the 7 steps of judging here. But it's nice to be able to look at a chart and pick out the key factors in the chart. Now, you'll find that when we go through 7 steps in judging, the best way to do a chart reading is to do it in a very systematic manner. And you start out going through the 7 steps. And as you get good, you may modify those steps. But the key is that you do some preliminary analysis, and that then builds up to a more detailed kind of a thing. When you see an aspect, let's say, we were talking on Mars square Jupiter. So let's say Mars is in Cancer and Jupiter is in Libra. Okay? And you know that those are 2 movable or cardinal signs. So that means those 2 planets could be square each other if they're close to the same degree. Well, how close can they be? Well, the aspect orb table tells you that. If that Jupiter square Mars, if the 2 are in angular houses, then see this column for angular houses, you go down to the square, it's 10 degrees. So they can actually be 10 degrees apart. Now, if it's a little old semisextile aspect, 30 degrees apart, in other words, they're in adjacent signs, and they're in a succeeding house, heck, that's only got a 2-degree orb. And the reason it's got such a small orb is that it's a fairly weak aspect, okay? There are angular, cadent, and succeeding houses. The first house, 4th, 7th, and 10th are angular houses. Planets in those houses have the highest volume of energy that comes through. So when planets in angular houses make aspect with other planets, because there's more power in angular houses, they get wider orbs. That means they can be a little further apart from the perfect aspect and still be an orb. So when you get to something, and the sun, so the sun and moon have bigger orbs than the planets do. So what this does is it's got succeeding houses, which are medium power houses here. Then it's got the angular houses, and then it's got cadent, which are the weakest houses. Those are the cadent houses are the 12th, the 12th, the 9th, the 6th, and the 3rd house are the cadent houses. Okay, so the cadent houses have the orb for an aspect is not as wide because they're weaker houses. If it's the sun or moon is allowed to be a little further apart from the perfect. If it's a square aspects means the planets are 90 degrees apart. If it's the sun or moon, they're allowed to be a little further apart from perfect 90 degrees than the planets because they exert more of an influence. And in fact, we teach that once Mercury's in orb, it gets more power because Mercury has direct access to the nervous system, so it has more. It can have more influence than the other planets. Okay, now the reason I brought this thing up is that you should have a good understanding of this table. And so what you do is, as you're reading charts, you're constantly referring to this table, but you should study the table carefully. So when somebody hands you a chart, you can look at it and you can pretty much know where all the key aspects in the chart, because you have a good idea of how wide the orbs are. Okay, now then the other thing I want to talk about is essential dignity. Here it is. Table of essential dignities. This is probably pretty hard to see. It's in Course 8. You'll find it. And what the table of essential dignities is that planets express better in some signs than others. For example, Leo is the home sign of the sun. And what that means, and what you have the home sign and the detriment sign. The sign of detriment, meaning it doesn't express very well, is always the opposite of the home sign. And then you have the exaltation sign, and you even have a degree of exaltation. And then, so you have exaltation and fall. So the sun is exalted in Aries, which means it's in its fall in Libra. Okay? So, and then finally, it's in harmony in Sag, which means that it's going to be in inharmony in the opposite sign, which is Gemini. Okay? Now, that sort of makes sense for the sun. It works well in the fire signs and less well and it said it's fall in Libra, because us Librans, we're always,
make your mind up.
we can't make our mind up, so that makes us not the world's greatest leaders, but we are really nice people. It's in the moon. The moon, its home is Cancer, it's exalted in Taurus, and it's at home, it's a harmony in Pisces. So you want to have this chart down too. This tells you how well the planets are going to express through the various signs. So not only do you want to know the key words for all the signs, so that how the planet expresses through that sign, home and detriment, exaltation, fall, harmony and inharmony signs. And since they work by opposite signs, it makes it a lot easier. So, and of course you have to know the rulerships. You got to memorize. I mean, this table you pretty much have to memorize at least part of it. You have to know that the moon rules Cancer, that Mercury rules Gemini and Virgo, that Neptune rules Pisces, Jupiter rules Sag and Pisces. And then these are pretty much standard. This is absolutely standard textbook astrology. Okay, now these are called essential dignities. Accidental dignities are where the planet falls in how it's distributed in the house. So in other words, it's accidentally dignified if it's in a powerful angular house like the 1st, 4th, 7th, or 10th. It's still powerful in the what would be mostly
11, 8, 9,
the mutable houses.
12.
And then as you get down into the Caton houses, it gets weaker and weaker. And that's called accidental dignity. And it's just a very old astrological term, because it's accidental in the sense that it just happens to be where the time of day that the chart's done for, where the planet falls in terms of what house it's in. Whereas the sign that it's in is more of an essential thing that lasts a lot longer. So now let's talk about, Fred Michael brought up Astrodynes. Okay. We're going to use Astrodynes a little in this class, but to be a good astrologer, you need to be able to do it without Astrodynes. What Astrodynes do is they give you a more precise measure. And what Astrodynes do is Astrodynes compute the power of the planets and therefore the signs based on what planets are in those signs, and the power of the houses based on what planets are in the houses. So it all comes down to computing the power of each one of the planets, and then you can compute the power of each one of the houses based on the power of the planets that rule those houses. Besides power, there's harmony. So with Astrodynes take into account like a planet is powerful if the more aspects it makes, and the more powerful those aspects. In other words, if a planet makes an aspect and it's very close, it gets more power if it is close to being in a perfect aspect with another planet than it is if it's sort of at the edge of its orb, just barely making an aspect. The planet gets more powerful if it's in an angular house than it does if it's in a cadent house. Okay. The other thing is harmony. Harmony is determined by the nature of the aspects. Trines, sextiles, semisextiles are harmonious. Semi-squares, squares, sesqui-squares, opposition or discordant. Conjunctions and inconjuncts are neutral. Some planets are harmonious, some are neutral. Right? The two benefics are Venus and Jupiter. The two malefics, we call them, are Mars and Saturn, and the others are considered neutral and expressed depending upon the aspect they make or the sign they're in. So harmony is determined by how much power it has, but is it in a harmonious sign, and does it make harmonious aspects? And all this can be totaled up for you with Astrodynes. So Astrodynes actually calculate the numeric value of all these things. But you can read a chart perfectly well without Astrodynes. You can often figure out what the dominant planet is. It's hard to do without Astrodynes, but half the time you can figure it out or get close enough when you look at a chart. There are, you don't need to see that a planet is high, has a large number of Astrodynes relative to its other planets, which makes it very prominent in the chart, because you can see, when you just look at the chart, once you're a good astrologer, you look at the chart, you see, if the planet's in an angle or makes a reasonably powerful aspect to the sun or the moon or Mercury, then that's the definition. We'll go over some of these definitions later. That's the definition of prominence. So it's prominent. You don't have to look at the Astrodynes. It's prominent in the chart. If it's in an angle, or if it makes significant aspects to the sun, moon, and Mercury. Okay, that's the rule. That's the old rule before Astrodynes came along. Well, guess what? Those old rules work just fine. So that's why you can pick up a chart and read a chart without having the Astrodynes. Okay, now the Astrodynes can be very helpful, and we'll talk more about that later. So let's get to the 7 steps. The first thing that you do when you're doing a chart is to look at the planetary distribution in the chart. And the best way to do that, and let me show you an example of that. This has little boxes where you count up movable, mutable, and fixed signs. Okay? How many planets are in mutable signs, fixed signs, or cardinal signs? Then you count up fire, air, earth, and water. How many planets are in that? These are called distribution. And then these over here are... these are ones we haven't even talked about. The houses are grouped together into like personal, companionship, public. Like the personal houses are actually 12 through 3. Companionship houses are 4 through 7. And 8 through 11 are the public houses. Okay, because houses that are elevated in the chart are more public, and houses that are down lower in the chart are more private. So anyway, the idea is that you're summing all these things up, and you do this manually. See, the problem with doing like using the horoscope program is, or any, solar fire or any of these things is, they do all this stuff for you. Okay? Well, it actually makes it difficult to read the chart. Okay? I mean, until you get good. Because today, and this is a real difficulty for people who are learning, see, they don't even see charts like this anymore. So, and let me give you an example of where one's filled out. Okay, here's an old chart that was done by probably Elbert Benjamin, okay? He's calculated these house cusps out here and the planets in the house, done all by hand, no computer. And then he's gone and he's counted, and he's filled out these boxes, and he's counted how many planets in fire, air, earth, and water, how many planets in cardinal, mutable, fixed, how many planets are in companionship houses, all this stuff. And then he forms, then this distribution, you can now start using the keywords for the triplicities, fire, earth, and water. You can say that, and I'm going to show you how to do this with Astrodynes too, but I'm sorry, I wish we could blow that out. But, you know, if a person has a lot of planets in one of the triplicities, like air or fire or whatever, then you know that they will tend to exhibit. These are the preliminary things that you do when you read a chart. So, you know, fiery, they're going to be ambitious and, you know, tend to be leaders and all the keywords for fire. But and the same thing with water or air. And if they're in fixed houses mostly rather than in mutable houses, then they would be, you know, their attention to detail and fixity of purpose is a general characteristic of these persons. And these general characteristics are very important
for interpreting the rest of it.
For interpreting the rest of the chart. And that's why you go through. And people don't do this anymore, but they should. I should send these charts. And we, you know, I don't think we've sold, we used to sell books of these charts, you know, tablets.
Well, people don't do hand charts anymore.
Of these charts. Well, of course, we haven't sold one of those in, I don't know how long, since the computer was invented, right? Because now everybody does it on the computer. And the only problem is that you don't get to go through the you know, those preliminary steps. Okay, so we're going to, over the next 10 minutes, I'm just going to briefly go through the 7 steps of judging here. So I'm going to go through it pretty fast because I want to talk about what we're going to do next week. And we can go back through this next week. We don't have to, you know, we can always continue on where we are. Okay, the preliminary, in doing preliminary things, you do exactly what you'd go fill out one of these charts, or your computer would do it for you. And the first thing you'd note is the power in a chart. So is the chart powerful? Does it have lots of planets and angles? Then that makes it powerful. Now, if you do Astrodynes, then I suppose you can always look at the total Astrodynes. But I think it's good to follow the old rules. You can also look at Astrodynes, but, you know, there's a lot of planets in angular houses. It tends to be a powerful house.
Well, if someone has a lot of planets and angles,
yeah,
does that mean, what does that tell me? That those
impact on the environment. Their impact tends to be much greater than people with lots of planets and more feeble houses. Now, that's a general rule, okay? But, you know, take Vicky's chart. She's got 4 or 5 planets in strong conjunction in the 6th house, one of the weakest houses. But there's all these powerful conjunctions that make lots of Astrodynes.
in close aspects.
In close aspect to each other, making aspects to other planets in the chart. And so turns out there's a lot of power there. Well, you can take that into account when you read the chart. You can see that, oh, well, maybe in a feeble house, but with all these powerful aspects, there's going to be a lot of power in the chart. So you use, the rules are good, but, you know, they're made to be broken, right? And then the step 2 in doing a chart, these are the preliminary steps you go through, and then we'll get into the details next week, is to note the quality, the distribution among cardinal, fixed, or mutable signs, the quadruplicities, and look at the keywords for people who are fixed signs or who are mostly mutable signs and tend to be very adaptable, people who are cardinal signs and are the pioneers, and the books give you a lot of detail. Then the third step is to look at the triplicity. Are they, you know, people often, sometimes they're a lot of earth or a lot of water, a lot of one or the other. So you note that, okay? There may be a mixture of two of them, okay? And sometimes it's just evenly distributed, in which case there's not really a lot you can say. They're pretty well balanced in terms of their temperament when they are pretty much spread out. Okay, then, and this is where we're probably going to pick up next week. Houses with, you look at the chart and you see that there are houses with planets. The houses that actually contain planets in them. And you use, what do? Is you go down and you note that and you know what those mean. Now these are events characteristic of each planet, but it's what happens when there's any sound, any house. I'm looking, and I hope you can see this chart. I'll put them all online. And by the way, please send me comments about, the visibility of this stuff and all that. I could blow this up and make it blow it up. You've gone through some preliminaries. Now you're getting a little more detailed in the chart. And this just all comes right out of the books. Okay. Any house that has the sun in it is going to be a house that impacts the significance and authority of the person, and it's going to be something that's pursued vigorously. And there's some other key words. I actually don't have them here. If you go down, if any house that's has Mars in it is going to be characterized by strife, haste, and increased expenditure of energy. Those three things: strife, haste, and an increased expenditure of energy. Now, that's what you build your vocabulary around, because those are the three things that are very characteristic of Mars. Okay, what is strife? Okay, strife could be, friction. It can be fighting. It can be accidents, or especially when you combine it with haste. Mars people are very energetic, but even if you're not a Mars person, when you've got a progressed aspect of Mars, or if you're in that department of life where ruled by the house that Mars is in, then there's going to be these three things. Any house that Jupiter's in is going to be characterized by abundance, optimism, and joviality. Things are going to tend to go well in that. If Saturn's in that house, then there's going to be increased work, increased responsibility, and economy or loss. You should absolutely memorize those words, okay? Because you can then build your vocabulary around them. Any house that Saturn is in is going to be characterized by work. There's going to be extra work there. If it's in your 11th house, then friends are going to be a lot of work, okay? If it's in your 7th house, then marriage and partnership is going to be a lot of work. Also, those houses can be characterized by responsibility. Things happen that make you have a feeling of responsibility, or things happen where you have to take responsibility. And once again, that's work. And then economy or loss. You have to economize. In other words, with Jupiter, there's abundance. With Saturn in that house, you have to economize. There's a dearth of, if it's in the 11th house, say France. So you have to work carefully with that. And then, of course, loss. So any house that's got Uranus in it is going to be one that can be characterized by sudden changes and radical events, and thinking that's out of the ordinary. Okay, so this is just sort of the summary thing, but let's move on. Houses that don't have planets in them are still important. You still have that department of life, but you have to look to the ruler of the cusp. Whatever sign is on the cusp of the house, if it's Capricorn, then Saturn is the chief ruler of that house. So it's just that they tend to have, what we teach is that the planet that rules the sign on the cusp of the house has about half the influence of a planet that's actually in the house. Okay, now, there are people who teach differently. You know, in Arabic astrology, they're big on the ruler of the cusp, but that's Zane did a lot of research on this, and that's what he does. So, and also the planet that, and I'm just taking this stuff right out of Course A. If a planet that rules a house by virtue of the sign on the house cusp, but it's in another house. So let's say you're you have Mercury rules your ninth house, okay, because you've got Gemini on it. But Mercury is actually in your seventh house, so that means that your partnership has marriage and partnership has some authority over those ninth house matters, which are religion, philosophy, long journeys, publishing, formal education, that kind of thing. So the house that the planet's actually in has authority over that. Okay, so and then of course you want to look at the best and worst planets and the best and worst houses. And this of course is where Astrodynes comes in really handy. Okay, now we're going to reiterate these things. In fact, we're going to go through them next time, and we're going to actually look at charts. But what I like to do for next time, and next time we're, if we go back and we look at it. But what I'd like you guys to do, let me show you an example chart, what I did. And here's what I'd like, and I'm not going to pick anybody, I'm just going to say everybody do this. Okay? Go pick a person who is in, some notable person or somebody that you'd like. And go get the information. What I'd like you to do is pick out some charts. Okay, pick out a chart, one or two, but do one and write down the. Like for example, I did Donald Trump. So here's what I did. I Googled. You can use Bing or Yahoo or whatever your search engine is. But I Googled Donald Trump horoscope. Okay? And I found out that he was born on June 14th, 1946 at 10:54 a.m. in Jamaica, New York. Now, I looked at a whole bunch of sources and almost all of them said that. One said 9:51 a.m. Did I say a.m.? 10:54. 9:51 a.m. in Queens. Okay, well I said, all right, that's good enough. I'll use the 10:54 in Jamaica, and that's probably pretty close to right. Now, if I was going on TV and I was going to talk about Donald Trump's chart, I would make darn sure I'd taken a look at his birth certificate. But in this case, we're pretty good. And then I Googled Donald Trump, and I went to, and there may be better sources, but I went to Wikipedia, and I wrote down a number of events from his life, to try and get an idea who he was. I read about him in Wikipedia. And wow, I realized I learned a lot of things about Donald Trump that I didn't know before. So, and then it made it fascinating to take a look at his chart. And when I started looking at his chart, of course, he's got Jupiter in the second house. But it turns out, for example, at age 13, and, in another series of classes, we'll do progressions. And that's where these events come. But knowing these events gives us a better idea of kind of who he is. We know he's an investor, television personality, American business magnate. At age 13, he had difficulties in his school, and they sent him to a military academy, and he just blossomed there. I mean, he really did great there. He did well academically. He did well in sports. He got awards. It was a big deal for him. He went to one college, and then he ended up going to Wharton School of Finance, University of Pennsylvania. Okay, and getting a Bachelor of Science in Economics. Okay, now I know he's really pretty smart. Because I actually wondered about how smart Donald was from some of the things that he's said, especially the political things. You wonder, like, Donald, are you all there? And so like in 1986, Woolman Rink in Central Park, New York, had been languishing. They've been trying to build it since like 1981 they started it. Okay, well, and it still wasn't finished, but there still was plenty of budget left. There was $3 million. Well, he finished it in about 9 months. He got it finished, and he only spent $750,000 of the $3 million that was left. That told me something about him. Now he's starting to feel his oats. Okay, and he's got some money. His father did. He did a great thing with his father that I didn't put up here, but his father was owned rental property, lots of rental property. So Donald started out with some money. And then he went to work for his father, and they made more money based on some things that Donald did. And then now, by 1989, he's really feeling his oats, and he's overextended himself, and he's unable to meet his loan payments on some of his. And this comes up several times. So this guy is going full out all the time, and he's always just at the edge of getting in trouble. But he's been pretty successful. And then, of course, there's political activity in marriages. I mean, I could have put more there. And we're not going to look at progressions, but we could then go through and sort of analyze the chart. And, maybe we'll start out looking at this next time. But if everybody would just pick a chart, they don't have to, you just pick some person, you Google them, you find out you don't have to do their chart. Just find out their time of birth and their place of birth. And we can do their chart and maybe note some interesting things about them from Wikipedia or wherever that we can use to kind of get an idea of who they are.
One of the nice things about Astrodynes, though, is that they have the Astro data bank.
Right.
And they will rate the quality of information that the chart is based on. That's a really nice thing.
That is the thing. You can go to Astrodynes.com. Well, it's called the Astro Data Bank.
You can go
if you Google Astro Data Bank.
It'll take you to the same place.
Yeah, and this was started by Lois Rod, who passed away, about 10 years ago. She was great because she established the chart rating. If it's a AA chart or if it gets an F, based on where did the information come from. If it comes from a valid birth certificate, then it's a AA chart.
All right.
And then it goes down. If it's a grandmother's, who's 100 years old, and her memory of what time it was, and it doesn't get a very good rating. Yeah, question, Barb?
Walt asks, what can I do if I do not know my exact time of birth?
Well, if you don't know your exact time of birth, then you have to do a thing called
Rectification.
Chart rectification. And
that's hard.
Chart rectification. I'd like to do a class on that because, anyway, I couldn't find his time of birth, but there's lots of information about this guy. We know the day he was born on. So, someday down the road, maybe we'll have a class where we actually try to do a chart rectification, but it's difficult. It's hard to do. So, and then, you got to follow up and see if it's right. So, okay, everybody, that's pretty much the end of the show, and I'll be posting these charts and sending out I may be adding to them some of the stuff that I talked about that might be missing from them and organizing. And as you go through course 2, 8, and 10, especially course 2 and 8, the organization of those things is, a good thing to do is to take the information and try and put it together, because there's good information in 2, 8, and 10 about the same thing, and slightly different information that makes it, if you put it together, you can, it makes it very easy for you to study. And one of these days we're going to do that.
So what are the subject of next class?
The subject of the next class is, what we're going to do is we're going to talk about just what a general chart reading. We're going to do some introductory stuff. And we're going to talk about the importance of the decadence. But then we're going to get right in. We're going to take some of the charts. Maybe we'll look at Donald Trump's chart, but hopefully you guys will come up with some charts too. And we'll pick one or two of them, and we'll go through how to interpret that chart, how to analyze stature, temperament, disposition, and mental ability from the chart. Okay, and we're going to look at just those aspects of the chart.
Will we be using the 7 steps in judging to?
Yeah, we'll start out with, we'll take the chart and we'll go through the 7 steps. You know, we'll talk about, well, is he mostly fire? Is he mostly fixed signs? And I'll get the keywords, because I didn't have all the keywords up here before, but I'll have the keywords for that. But then we'll get into looking at a couple of charts and trying to look at what determines stature, size, and that sort of thing. What temperament and disposition? How do you figure that out? And mental ability.
And this is all from course 10.
And
so
this,
if someone
you'll find all of this in this chapter 2. But I do want to make sure you can see these charts. So if you're having difficulty seeing them, let me know. And
No.
okay, any other questions, comments? Right. He's
How do you
smiling.
exit? How do you exit from this program?
How do you exit? Oh.
How do you exit? Well, you close if you X out the control. See, you have two things. You have a control and you have a go-to meeting viewer window. And if you close out either one of those, the thing goes away. Now, when I close it out, I'm going to close it out for everybody. No, Linda, we're not going to be using Beginner's Horoscope. Although
That's a great book.
it's a great book, and we can talk about it next time.
So have a chart for next time of a notable, and we will go over the 7 steps.
Yep, that's right. With an emphasis on, we're not going to do the whole chart. We're going to do a little part of the chart, but sort of get down to detail. And this is the hardest to do. This temperament, disposition, stature is kind of tricky. Everybody who's watching on churchoflight.tv and needs instructions about how to do the go-to meeting, or wants to talk about the go-to meeting, or needs anything, and that goes for anybody else who's still online out there on go-to meeting, is send an email to paul@light.org. It's easy, so and I'll try and help you out. Okay, good night, everybody.
All right, thank you.
Night,
Thank
Molly.
you.
You're
Night.
welcome.
Okay,
Night.
bye, guys.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Night, Linda.
Bye.
That was a lot of information, Paul.
Yeah.